So this is the Google Pixel 7. It has arguably one of the best smartphone cameras in the world. But I'm a professional photographer who strictly uses full-frame mirrorless cameras for my photography. So today I will give you my honest opinion on the Google Pixel 7's cameras from a professional photographer. So stick around and let's jump right in. What is up, y'all? It is the Project Photography back with another video, and today we are doing a full review on the Google Pixel 7 from a professional photographer standpoint. Such an interesting camera to use. In the short time that I've used it, this is going to be the first full shoot, so we're going to treat it like a professional shoot. So with that being said, I do all of my reviews with my cameras and lenses, where I actually go out and actually shoot with it. So that's what we're doing in today's episode. We're going around doing POV style photography and just capturing things around this area. This is the circle in orange, if you guys, people in California, know. So yeah, guys, let's cut to the B-roll and get right on with shooting with the Google Pixel 7 from a professional photographer's view. What's up, y'all? We are now behind the scenes, behind the camera. I'm going to give you guys a just rundown as to what my thought processes are when shooting these photos, because this is a photography channel and we care a lot about how we shoot the photos. First of all, I just want to apologize because it's kind of a hard time to see the screen while we're shooting. Not sure why, but yeah. And this is actually one of the photos I really liked. I think using this as a 14mm wide angle was a good choice because we're able to exaggerate a lot more of the sky, make it feel a lot wider, and just generally create a good photo. But using this phone has been a really interesting experience, and I think the fact that it has a 14mm wide angle is honestly very nice, and I've been using it a lot, even in situations like this where I am shooting a long exposure and we capture it images like this. And I love shooting long exposures because I feel like they're incredibly interesting. It's another level of expression that I really like, and this is a technique I use a lot in my landscape photography. But as you saw there's a transition from an unedited to an edited photo, and usually when there's two of those photos, that means that it was edited. But as you can tell, there actually wasn't a huge difference in terms of the unedited versus edited version, mainly because I feel like the JPEGs actually did a really good job at processing the image and making sure that, you know, it looks good. And that's one thing that I think this Google Pixel does really well. Straight out of camera, you can essentially use a photo without having to feel like you gotta edit it or alter it in any way, because generally speaking, it does a great job. But right here, I actually use the magic eraser to remove this fire hydrant in the bottom left-hand corner. You can see that disappear, and a small edit made to this photo. But I generally think that, you know, you don't need to edit these photos except for situations like that where you actually want to go ahead and remove things. Now here, I was actually using the 2x telephoto because I just want to see how it came out, and it was alright. It wasn't absolutely mind-blowing, but I think it did a decent job. I definitely don't want to be using it a whole lot because it is a digital zoom versus an optical zoom, and optical will always be better. So right here, I think this is a really interesting spot to actually use the wide angle. I think it's really interesting because we can exaggerate more of this tarp up top, and then we bring in the edited version, as you can see here. Not a huge change, but I generally like the composition of the photo, and it leads your eyes more into the center of the frame because this tarp on top. So we're going to go ahead and move on here. And the next photo I'm going to be actually taking is a portrait mode of these leaves here. Now for me, I actually really enjoy nature photography, generally speaking, but we're going to try the portrait mode. But I kind of felt like the computational photography side of things fell apart because it just didn't do a good job at outlining what my exact subject matter was. But that's kind of difficult. I mean, I know it is difficult, but again, those are limitations of computational photography. So right here, we're going to actually using the reflection to go ahead and, you know, create a much more interesting photo here. And as you can see, we have these kind of like blurred out parts of it, and here's the edited version. I really like this edit a lot. I think this is where the edit actually made a lot of sense, but I like doing this because the reflections you get with the photo are definitely more interesting. With that being said, let's jump right back and talk about some specs and take a little break. All right, so I have been shooting with the Google Pixel 7 for a hot second now. And for me, I've actually really enjoyed the experience. I think it's actually been pretty good. What I want to do actually is run down a few of the specs. So also another disclaimer, I don't think I mentioned this in the first part, I will not be reviewing video, I will just be reviewing photos because I am a photographer and this is a photography channel. So if you were looking for some sort of like video review, this is not the video. So first of all, for the main camera, we got a 24mm with a 1.85 aperture, phase detect autofocus, and a 1/1.31 inch sensor. And then we have the ultra wide, which is a 12 megapixel, 14mm f2.2 aperture, phase detect autofocus, and a 1/2.86 inch sensor. And then the front camera is a 10.8 megapixel camera with a f2.2 aperture, fixed focus, roughly 20mm focal length. I feel like I've been using that wide angle a lot because I am a landscape photographer, so I do prefer more wider images, which is why you've seen a lot of them are very wide at the 14mm focal length, which is actually a very good focal length. To be honest, that's the focal length I use for my landscape photography, so I'm very familiar with it. So after this break, we're gonna be actually shooting a little bit more, and then we're gonna go back to my studio where I'm gonna be actually doing the full review of this camera. So with that being said, guys, let's jump right back into the POV photography. All right, so now we are back with some more POV photography, and I wanted a little bit of a change of scenery. As you see, we can actually see the phone a little bit better, but we want to change scenery, so I'm going to be shooting some of these like houses over here, more of this 14mm wide angle stuff, and a slight edit. As you can see, we're just bringing down the shadows very slightly, as well as bringing down the highlights very slightly. I feel like there didn't need to be much of a change, but yeah, so we're gonna go ahead and just move over slightly and capture what I can. And for me, I really like that 14mm. We're able to exaggerate the sky more. A little bit of that distortion makes it just a much more interesting image. So there's the edit right there. And then we're gonna go ahead and move on. And I wanna try another portrait mode because I really wanna see how this thing actually is. So we're gonna have a little bit more of a prominent subject in this flower, and go ahead and capture that. I think it does a bit of a better job because the phone actually knows exactly what the subject matter is in the flower, and the outline is just a little bit better and much more pleasing. So we're gonna go ahead and move on here. Next photo I really want to capture is across the street, as you can see. And don't worry guys, we're not invading anyone's privacy. I mean, this is all open to the public, so you're allowed to do this kind of stuff. But I'm taking a long exposure here just because I want to see what it does. In the sense that I want to see like how the image is first of all going to come out when there's not a definite subject matter to be had when it comes to long exposure. I generally think it does a decent job. I mean, of course, I wish we were able to get a long exposure in which the sky was moving, but you know, we don't really have that option here. So we're going to take in the last photo of the day. As you see, I'm zooming in and kind of seeing like what exactly happened with that long exposure because I kind of saw stuff at the edges. But we're going to take one last photo of the day here where I want to get a bit of a vertical image, 14mm of this house, and then using this sidewalk as a foreground subject matter just to kind of create some more depth to the image. So this is the last photo we're gonna end on, and I generally think it's a decent photo. I mean, it's not amazing, but I love using the 14mm focal length. I mean, it's just such an amazing focal length, and we're able to get much more interesting images out of it. So yeah, guys, that's the end of the POV stuff. Here are the two photos that I really liked. I love this photo of the reflection. I think it's a great composition overall. And we're able to use a lot more of those leading subject matters that move your eyes from the left to the right because of the chairs and tables, as well as these little lampshades. But also I really enjoy this one of the Black Dot Coffee because I don't know, it's the way the building is, and also I'm just a fan of coffee. But anyways, guys, we're going to go back to my studio where I'm going to be talking about my full review and thoughts on the Google Pixel 7, so stay tuned and let's jump right in. All right, y'all, we are now back in the studio and we're going to be reviewing the Google Pixel 7's cameras as a professional photographer, of course. And first of all, I'm just going to talk about the JPEGs, no RAWs in this video, but then after that, we're going to talk about some of the computational photography modes like the action pan, as well as a long exposure and portrait and so forth. Then we're going to jump right into the conclusion. So to talk about the JPEG, just how the images actually look straight out of the phone. First of all, I am actually a fan of how they look. Sometimes I do think they can be a little over-processed in terms of the HDR. Sometimes it can go a little overboard in the sharpening, but overall, I genuinely like the photos out of this. I think we have really nice punchy contrast. The colors are very nice. They can be a bit muted, but that doesn't mean it's a bad thing. You can always adjust it post. And just the other few notes, you know, first of all, I feel like the photos do come out a little bit over-sharpened. It can go a little overboard in terms of that in the HDR, so that's just something to kind of note. You actually do not need to edit these photos. As you can see here, I have a few photos that I edited using Google Photos with just the JPEG versus the original, and you can see there's just such a marginal difference. And if you are that kind of person that cares about that 1% difference, then honestly go for it. But I think for majority of the people, we don't really need to be editing photos in Google Photos because the photos actually come out really good straight out of JPEG. So now I really want to talk about the zooming and so forth and the different cameras that are actually on this Google Pixel. First of all, we have a 14mm to a 15mm in terms of actually digitally zooming because you can do that. But overall, I would stick with optical zooming only. So only use the 14mm and the 24mm, essentially the 0.7 and then the 1x zoom. And honestly, the reason why is that digital zooming will never be better than actual optical zooming, because as you can see with these two photos, one is using the 2x versus one is just a 1x, and 2x is a digital zoom. And as you can tell, as we zoom in, the 2x does not look nearly as good as the 1x. I would honestly just stick to optical zooming, even though we are getting a 50 megapixel sensor with the main camera. So you could technically go to 2x, but I would only use that if you really have to. And speaking of 50 megapixel sensors, one thing that actually kind of annoyed me about this phone is the fact that I cannot actually access 50 megapixel files. And now for majority of people, you will not need 50 megapixels, but for me, I am a landscape photographer. I care about how my images look, and with a 50 megapixel sensor, you can just zoom in so much more than something like a 12 megapixel image, because we just get more pixels and more detail and more, just a better photo overall. We cannot access that here in the Google Pixel 7, which is honestly a huge letdown. Something that really impressed me with the main camera of the Pixel 7 is the fact that the natural bokeh actually looks pretty good. If you get close enough to a subject, you don't have to use portrait mode in order to get some nice bokeh in the background. As you can see with this photo with the leaf, we have some nice natural bokeh, no portrait mode or nothing. And I feel like the photos actually come out pretty good, but this is only be able to use in very certain scenarios. We can't really use it for just like portraits of people generally, because we're at 24mm in terms of our normal camera focal length. Not really going to get us any impressive bokeh. So with that being said, let's jump right into the computational modes of photography. So like I said before, the portrait mode, the action mode, the night sight, and so forth. And those are the three main ones that we're talking about. Let's talk about the different motion modes. And first of all, my favorite one to use is definitely the long exposure mode. As a landscape photographer, I love having long exposures of water moving and just making it look incredible. And I think the motion mode is actually good for long exposures because we're able to do that with just normal everyday objects. So what's going to happen is essentially you click the shutter button and it'll determine itself for how long the shutter is going to be open. And this is going to determine how much motion is going to be actually blurred in the final image. So what I've found is that generally speaking, if there's more things moving and faster moving objects, then the shutter will be open for a lot less time. Whereas if there's less things moving around, you will have to leave the shutter open for quite some time. The thing that I don't really like is that you can't actually determine how long you want these shutters to stay open or closed, and Google will essentially determine what that number is. But for me, I like to have more control over my different modes of photography, and I just don't get that here. But generally speaking, the photos come out pretty good. The only exceptions is if the camera actually does not know what is being photographed or what is actually moving inside of the frame, then it's gonna have to guess, and it just doesn't come out as clear as it wants. And another problem is that sometimes the edges of the frame will get a little bit blurred and distorted, so I don't know what's really going on there, even though things aren't moving. But the last thing is that when I was taking photos of some cars, they kind of looked a little jittery, so I don't know what's really going on. It's not perfect, but it's definitely better than nothing. The next one is the action pan. So I actually really enjoy doing this. You can only do it with a subject that is actually moving. And honestly, for the most part, it actually worked pretty well. You need to know what is actually moving in the frame in terms of the camera itself. It needs to know what is moving. But the other thing is that you have to be panning along with the actual subject itself, or you're not going to get anything. But overall, the action pan actually works pretty well. But now let's talk about portrait mode. And I know this is an area that a lot of people have been looking forward to, and honestly, I'm a little disappointed in it. Because here's the thing, this is kind of a similar story to the motion mode, but if it doesn't know what exactly you are trying to do the portrait mode of, it's gonna have a really hard time actually cleaning up the other parts of the image. Because what it essentially does is it takes a photo and then determines what you actually put your focus on and then blurs out the rest of it. And the problem is the camera actually has to determine what is in focus and what is going to be blurred, and sometimes it has a really hard time doing that if it's a very busy scene. I feel like the focus from the in focus to the out of focus, the transition is not really that smooth. It's not going to be as smooth as an actual camera with an f1.8 aperture and so forth. It does a pretty decent job, but if you zoom in, you can definitely tell. Overall though, if you don't pixel peep and you kind of just look at the actual photo, it does come out pretty decent, but you just definitely have to be careful in terms of like when you're using it. And lastly, let's jump right in and talk about the night mode. Honestly, I don't really have that many notes on this. Honestly, this is actually one of the best modes for Google, because we do get that f1.85 aperture, I believe, with the main camera, but the problem is it's never going to be as good as capturing a long exposure, because we still have to drop down the shutter speed a lot and bump up the ISO, making our photos a little bit grainier. But with night mode, because we're able to take a longer exposure, we're able to have reduced noise and a cleaner image overall, and actually does a really good job, as you can see here. Honestly, I don't have that many things to say about night mode. It's just very good. So just an overall summary on how good the actual modes are. I do find the modes, when used correctly and when the camera knows exactly what is the actual target of the photo, they actually do a pretty good job. I feel like we're able to get long exposures that we weren't able to get before. We were able to get action pans that we simply were not able to get before. And overall, I feel like it is trying to mirror a lot of the creative tools that a regular mirrorless camera is going to do. But it's not going to be nearly as good because we're still using computational photography to achieve these things rather than just the natural form of photography that happens with an actual camera. But for people that obviously do not have a mirrorless camera, this is actually as good as it's probably going to get. The computational side of things is actually quite good. Google just needs to improve them and make them better over time. But overall, you can use these for the things that they're intended for. Another thing to note about these modes is that you don't get RAWs, only JPEGs, which kind of sucks for everyone else, but you know, it is what it is. You probably weren't going to be using this mode for RAW photos anyways, because a lot of computational photography has to be done to make the final image. With that being said, let us jump right into the conclusion. And I know I probably sound very pessimistic making this video, but it's just because when I test out cameras, I'm very, I want to give my honest answers and honest opinions about them. I am a little bit disappointed with the computational side of things when it comes to the Google Pixel 7. I feel like some of the long exposure stuff as well as the portrait stuff could have been better. But overall, the photos that come out of the Google Pixel 7 are incredibly good. They're second to none, to be honest. I loved using the wide angle. The 14 millimeters on the wide end is absolutely fantastic. I mean, that is my favorite focal length in all of photography, and I just love taking photos with it. And everything from the colors to the contrast to how the camera actually takes photos straight out of camera looks amazing. You don't even have to edit it, and that's how good the photos are. It's just, we gotta work on the computational side of things in terms of the over processing and over sharpening. We need to make sure that things look a lot more natural, a lot more pleasing to the eye, because sometimes the photos can feel a little bit jarring. It's really impressive because I was using the Google Pixel 4a a lot for my mobile photography. And now moving to the 7, there is definitely an improvement in terms of the quality of the glass itself, as well as the different computational creative side of things, like the long exposure and the action pans. Those are cool things that I just didn't have access to before. But is it gonna replace my Nikon Z6, which is my professional mirrorless camera, anytime soon? The answer is a resounding no. It simply just can't do the things that my regular camera can do. When it takes photos like portraits as well as long exposure, it looks incredibly natural, whereas the Google Pixel 7 has to use a lot of its AI and its computational photography to achieve those things, and some things are just going to fall through the cracks. But that's totally okay though, because the Google Pixel 7 is not meant to replace a professional mirrorless camera anytime soon. It is meant for your average consumer that wants to go out and just have a really good camera inside of their phone, inside of their pocket, that they don't have to actually bring this huge thing around. And my favorite saying is the best camera that you have is the one on you. And majority of the time, the one you're gonna have on you is your phone. So with the Google Pixel 7, I think it is absolutely incredible. If you want a better camera system though, Google Pixel 7 Pro is definitely the way to go. But for the budget, I mean, I bought this phone for $449, which is absolutely insane. I mean, for the dollar, it's such a good price. But there is one piece that I left out in this video, and I did not talk about the RAWs. And the biggest reason for that is because I believe the RAWs actually deserve a full separate video on their own. And as some of you guys may or may not know, this camera can take RAW photos and JPEG photos. And what RAW photos are is essentially a photo that has all of the data that the camera sensor is able to read. And what we're able to get is more detail, more dynamic range, as well as just better colors that are more natural. And so what I do with these RAW photos, I take it into Adobe Mobile Lightroom, which you have to pay for, but it's already tied to my regular Lightroom subscription. So for me, it's actually free, but you're able to create even better images than I believe what the Google Pixel 7 with its JPEGs can do. So stay tuned for that video next week. I'm gonna be comparing the RAW photos from the Google Pixel 7 to my main mirrorless camera. And for me, that is what I'm using about 95% of the time, because honestly, I don't necessarily need a camera with me on all times, but if I can get a camera that is in my pocket all the time that shoots RAW images, that's gonna be incredible. I do think the Google Pixel 7 is actually a very good camera for the price especially. And if you wanted a really good camera inside of your smartphone, the Google Pixel 7 and probably the 7 Pro will do just fine for you. So anyways, guys, let me know what you think about this video. Let me know what you think about the Google Pixel 7 and what camera are you using in terms of your smartphone. So anyways, guys, thank you so much for experiencing the world with me today. Please feel free to rate, comment, subscribe, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.